It was meant to unite a kingdom. A royal wedding between two great houses. A celebration of peace after years of bloodshed. France watched as a Catholic princess and a Protestant prince stood at the altar, hoping this marriage would end the violence tearing the country apart. But instead, it did the unthinkable. But before we can understand how everything fell apart, we need to go back a few steps and find out why France was already on the edge of disaster. By the summer of 1572, France had been fighting with itself for 10 hard years. The First War of Religion erupted in 1562 when Huguenot worship in the town of Wassy was broken up by soldiers loyal to the Catholic Duke of Guise. A second round of fighting started in 1567, and a third, even larger war burned from 1568 to 1570. Each conflict ended with a fragile peace treaty, and each treaty pleased almost no one. Catholic leaders feared that every concession to the Huguenots weakened the authority of the crown and the church. Huguenot nobles, meanwhile, felt that the promised rights in each agreement were either delayed or ignored. Paris, the largest city in France, sat at the centre of this tension. Its churches preached that heresy threatened the very soul of the kingdom. Its guilds and traders worried that Protestant victories would break long-standing privileges. Even ordinary citizens, hurt by rising taxes and poor harvests, blamed unrest on the new religion. Across the Seine, Huguenot safe houses stood behind bolted doors, yet the people inside rarely felt safe. In this uneasy world, three figures shaped the next move. Margaret of Valois was 19 in 1572. She read Latin as easily as French, danced with perfect courtly grace, and enjoyed writing poems in private notebooks. She was also a daughter of King Henry II and Catherine de Medici, and sister to the current king, Charles IX. She seemed a shining ornament of the royal family. Her value to the crown was enormous. As an unmarried princess, her hand could be offered to secure alliances, soothe enemies, or reward friends. Henry of Navarre was also 19. He had grown up in the rough country south of the river Garonne, where stone castles overlooked fields of wheat and grapevines. His mother, Queen Jeanne d'Albret of Navarre, had openly converted to Calvinism and raised her son in that faith. Henry hunted, joked, and argued with the directness of a soldier, but behind his relaxed manner lay firm resolve. He would defend his religion and his family's claim to the distant French throne. Catherine de Medici was the most experienced player at court. Born into the powerful Medici family of Florence, she had become Queen of France through marriage, then Queen Mother to 4 French kings. Some called her a peacemaker. Others whispered that she used poison often as pen and parchment, but everyone agreed she understood power. She kept careful balance among Catholic dukes, Protestant princes, and her own ambitious sons, always seeking a way to hold the kingdom together and keep the Valois dynasty on the throne. After the Third War ended with the Peace of Saint-Germain in August 1570, Catherine searched for a durable solution. She believed that military victories alone could not end the cycle. Instead, she hoped for a public act of reconciliation that would tie Catholic and Protestant interests so tightly that neither side could risk a new war. Her answer was marriage. Catherine turned to her daughter Margaret and to Henry of Navarre. If a Catholic princess and a Protestant prince could stand together before God and the realm, she argued, then lesser nobles might copy their example. The plan looked bold, even modern, but it was also risky. First, Catherine had to persuade King Charles IX and the Royal Council. Charles trusted his mother's judgment, yet he worried that a mixed marriage might anger the Pope and Spain. Second, she had to convince Henry of Navarre's mother, Jeanne d'Albret, who demanded that her son abandon none of his religious principles. Negotiations dragged on for 2 years. Letters crossed the country listing dowries, titles, and the fine print of wedding dispensations. In June 1572, Queen Jeanne died suddenly in Paris, perhaps from natural illness, perhaps from infection caught while shopping for wedding clothes. Her death left Henry without his strongest advisor, but it did not end the talks. By late July, both courts agreed on a date, 18th of August, 1572. At that point, tensions began to climb. Pope Gregory XIII refused to issue the usual formal blessing because the groom was a declared heretic. Many French bishops hesitated to officiate. Hardline Catholic nobles, led by the Guise family, warned that any show of favour to Protestants would open the gates to rebellion. Street preachers in Paris thundered that allowing a Huguenot prince inside Notre-Dame would defile the cathedral itself. Some parish priests urged worshippers to boycott royal tax collectors in protest. On the Huguenot side, trust was thin. Admirals Gaspard de Coligny and François Delannoy reminded their followers that past edicts had promised safety but delivered persecution. Yet they also saw a rare chance to win influence at the very heart of government. Convinced, or perhaps pressured, they travelled to Paris with retinues of armed gentlemen, filling the narrow lanes around the Louvre with bright uniforms and suspicious eyes. As August unfolded, the population of Paris swelled. Vendors arrived to sell flowers, ribbons and sweet wine for the wedding week. So did pickpockets, mercenaries looking for day work, and spies who reported every rumour back to competing noble factions. City guards doubled patrols along the walls. Tavern keepers took down wooden shutters each morning only to nail them up again at dusk, fearing brawls after dark. Still, the royal proclamation went out. The wedding of Margaret of Valois and Henry of Navarre would take place on the appointed day, in full view of God, the court and the people. The printed notices used cheerful language about peace and unity, yet careful readers saw the warnings buried in small type. Guests were instructed to appear unarmed inside the cathedral precincts. Foreign ambassadors were asked to limit the size of their entourages. Citizens were reminded that any disturbance during the royal ceremonies would be punished as treason. Behind palace walls, the mood mixed celebration with dread. Margaret's dressmakers stitched pearls onto yards of blue velvet, while gossip spread that the groom might be barred from wedding mass. Henry's Protestant advisers debated how close they should stand to Catholic guards lining the nave. Catherine moved through the corridors of the Louvre, meeting with cardinals in one room and Huguenot captains in the next, reassuring each that safety was guaranteed. Yet the guarantees sounded thin in the echoing courtyards of Paris. The city's older residents remembered the riots of the First War when Huguenot homes were sacked near the riverbanks. Younger apprentices muttered about the price of bread and blamed the Protestants for every shortage. Seditious ballads circulated in taverns, claiming that the Valois crown had sold France to heretics. As the wedding day approached, the uneasy peace Catherine desired seemed both tantalizingly close and frighteningly fragile. Would the marriage create a bridge over the religious divide, or would it place two proud faiths on a collision course inside the same city walls? Paris had never seen a wedding like this one. On the surface, it looked like a great royal celebration. Streets were decorated, nobles in colourful clothes filled the city, music echoed through the squares. But behind all of that, there was fear, real fear, because this was the marriage of a Catholic princess and Protestant prince in a time when those two sides hated each other. But let's look at what happened that day, August the 18th, 1572, step by step. The wedding took place in front of the famous Notre-Dame Cathedral, as most royal weddings did. Now here's something strange. Because Henry was Protestant, he was not allowed inside the cathedral for the Catholic Mass. Imagine that. It was his own wedding day, but he had to stay outside while the ceremony began. He waited in front of the church while a priest led the Catholic rites inside. Margaret, dressed in gold and decorated with pearls, was led to the altar. Everyone watched her closely. She was calm and beautiful, as a royal bride was expected to be, but was she truly willing? Later in her life, Margaret wrote that she had been forced into the marriage by her mother, Catherine de Medici. In fact, when the priest asked if she agreed to marry Henry, she stayed silent. It is said that her brother, King Charles IX, grabbed her by the back of the head and forced her to nod. That nod was taken as her answer. What would you do if you were Margaret? Imagine you're standing in front of a crowd, wearing a heavy golden gown, knowing that your marriage might cause a civil war, or worse. Everyone is watching. Your family is pressuring you. The man you are marrying is the leader of the group your people have been fighting for years, and there are whispers around the city that something bad is going to happen. Would you say yes, or would you want to run? After the religious part was finished, Henry and Margaret were officially married. Then the celebrations began. There were fireworks, banquets, dances and parades. Nobles came from all parts of France to attend. Many Protestant leaders came to Paris just for this event. After all, this wedding was supposed to bring peace between Catholics and Protestants. But if you looked more closely, the city was full of signs that peace was not really coming. Crowds of angry Parisians gathered in the streets. Many of them were Catholics and hated the idea of a Protestant prince marrying a Catholic princess. They saw it as an insult. Some shouted insults at the wedding guests. Others spread rumours that the Protestants had come to take over the city. Priests preached in churches that this marriage was a sin. The Pope believed that this union went against Catholic teaching, and he was not alone. Many Catholic nobles had refused to attend the wedding or had left Paris completely. The royal court was filled with tension. On one side, Queen Mother Catherine de' Medici was trying to keep things under control. She had spent years planning this marriage, hoping it would stop the wars, but even she could not calm everyone down. On the other side were the Guise family, powerful Catholic nobles who wanted revenge for past crimes committed by Protestants. The soldiers in the city were nervous. Many were placed at key streets and buildings to keep order, but instead of making people feel safe, their presence made the atmosphere worse. It felt more like a city under siege than one celebrating a royal wedding. Still, the festivities continued. Rich nobles held private parties. The royal family gave out gifts and money. But all of this was happening under a dark cloud. It was as if everyone knew that something terrible might happen, but no one could say it out loud. And they were right to be afraid. Just 4 days after the wedding, on August 22nd, 1572, something terrible happened that pushed France to the edge of disaster. Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, one of the most important Protestant leaders in the country, was shot while walking through the streets of Paris. He had been invited to Paris as part of the peace efforts surrounding the royal wedding. His presence was risky, but he believed the king had guaranteed his safety. That morning, as Coligny returned from visiting King Charles IX at the Louvre Palace, a gunman fired from a window above the street. Coligny was hit in the hand and arm. He fell, badly wounded, but he did not die. His guards rushed him to his lodging nearby. The gunman escaped and was never caught. And if you are wondering now who ordered the shooting, no one knows for sure, even today. Some blamed the Guise family, powerful Catholic nobles who hated Coligny and blamed him for the death of one of their own years earlier. Others thought it was the work of Catherine de' Medici, who feared Coligny was gathering too much influence over her son, the king. Another theory pointed to the Spanish, who did not want France helping Protestants in the Netherlands. But no matter who did it, the damage was done. The attempted assassination sent a shock through the Protestant community. Many Huguenots were already uneasy about coming to Paris. Now their leader had been nearly killed in the middle of the capital, with royal guards nearby. They began demanding justice from the king and his council. Coligny, lying in bed with his wounds wrapped, told his followers to stay calm. He still believed the king would punish the attacker, but tensions kept rising. Catherine de' Medici was worried. She feared the Protestants might try to take revenge. Thousands of them were still in the city for the wedding. Some were soldiers, others were nobles with their own armed followers. King Charles IX was only 22 years old. He was nervous, emotional, and often torn between his mother's advice and his own doubts. As pressure built, Catherine and her allies pushed him harder. She warned him that if he did nothing, the Protestants would retaliate. She told him that the court and even the royal family might be in danger. Finally, Charles made a decision, one that would change France forever. On the night of August 23rd, 1572, in the Palace of the Louvre, King Charles IX, still shaken and under pressure, gave the final order: eliminate the Protestant leaders still in Paris. The plan was to target only a few top men, but what followed was something much bigger, much darker, and far more violent than anyone imagined. As the king's soldiers prepared to strike, one signal was agreed upon. The bells of the church of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois would ring at dawn to start the operation. That church stood right next to the Louvre, within hearing distance of everyone in the royal palace and in much of the city. Now imagine this. It's just before sunrise. Most of Paris is still asleep. Then the bells begin to toll. The sound echoed through the narrow stone streets, calling not people to prayer, but to killing and death. The king's guards, including elite Swiss soldiers, moved quickly. They went straight to the homes where Protestant leaders were staying. The most important target was Admiral Gaspard de Coligny. He was still weak from his wounds, resting in bed. A group of men led by the Duke of Guise himself burst into his room. They dragged him from his bed, stabbed him to death, then threw his body out of the window into the street below. There others cut off his head and paraded it through the city. The news of Coligny's murder spread fast, and so did the violence. Catholic mobs began roaming the streets. Some had lists of names and addresses of Protestants. Others acted on fear and hatred. Doors were kicked in. Men, women, and even children were slaughtered in their homes, in alleys and on the steps of churches. The city was sealed off. Chains were stretched across the streets to block the exits. No one could leave. Protestant houses were marked or identified. Some Catholics placed white crosses on their doors to avoid confusion. Neighbours who had once greeted each other in the market now turned into attackers or victims. The River Seine began to fill with bodies. Victims were thrown into the water to hide the evidence, or simply dumped because there were too many corpses to bury. The flow of bodies was so constant that people downstream refused to drink the water for weeks. For many Huguenots, there was no escape. By the end of the day, thousands were dead. The exact number will never be known. In the middle of all this horror stood Margaret of Valois, now Queen of Navarre. She had just been married days earlier. Now her family was leading a mass killing of her new husband's people. But Margaret did not stay silent. According to her own memoirs, she hid several Protestants in her rooms. She locked the doors and refused to let guards search them. Some of those people survived because she chose to protect them. Most importantly, Margaret is said to have helped save the life of her new husband, Henry of Navarre. Guards came for him too, but Henry was clever and careful. He promised to convert to Catholicism if his life was spared. The royal court accepted for the moment. Still, Henry was placed under strict watch in the palace and could not leave Paris. Margaret stood by him, despite being caught between two worlds, her powerful Catholic family and the man she had just married, now a prisoner, surrounded by the blood of his friends. But this was just the beginning. In Paris alone, it is believed that around 2,000 people were murdered during those first bloody days. But the violence did not stop in the capital. As news of the massacre spread, other cities followed. In Lyon, Rouen, Toulouse, Bordeaux, and several smaller towns, Catholic mobs attacked their Protestant neighbours. Some were attacking on orders, others took matters into their own hands. The final death toll is impossible to know exactly, but historians estimate that between 5,000 and 30,000 people were killed across France. Imagine thousands of people, families, community leaders, even children, killed in their own cities just for belonging to the wrong faith. Many towns that had once had active Protestant populations were suddenly almost empty. Others saw people convert to Catholicism out of fear or flee the country altogether. And what happened to Henry of Navarre, the young Protestant leader who had just married into the royal family? To stay alive, he had to publicly convert to Catholicism. He was under constant watch, held like a prisoner inside the royal court. His every move was controlled. He later said that he lived more like a captive than a king. Margaret, his wife, stayed by his side, but their relationship could never be whole. The marriage, which had been arranged to unite France, now stood as a symbol of betrayal and bloodshed. Margaret had tried to protect Henry and even saved some of his friends, but trust between them had been broken from the very beginning. The Protestant leadership was devastated. Many of their most experienced and influential nobles had been killed. The movement lost not only lives, but also power and momentum. Those who survived were more cautious, and in some cases, more radical. Outside of France, the reaction was one of shock and horror. In Protestant countries like England and parts of Germany, the massacre was seen as proof that Catholic rulers could not be trusted. Diplomats and ambassadors wrote about the killings in letters full of fear and outrage. Even some Catholics in Europe were disturbed by what had happened, worried that the violence had gone too far. Instead of healing France's wounds, the wedding had torn them open anew. Peace was gone, trust was shattered, and the kingdom stood divided more than ever before. From the very start, the marriage between Margaret of Valois and Henry of Navarre was not a love story. It was a political deal arranged by Margaret's mother, Catherine de Medici, to stop a civil war. But instead of peace, it brought bloodshed, and the marriage itself, like the country around it, soon began to fall apart. After the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, their relationship grew colder. Henry was forced to convert to Catholicism to stay alive, and Margaret stayed loyal to her family, even while trying to protect him. For several years they lived under the same roof, but their lives were separate. Henry was watched closely, and he knew he couldn't fully trust anyone, not even his wife. Once Henry finally escaped the royal court in 1576 and returned to leading the Protestant cause, the couple became even more distant. Margaret stayed behind, and as Henry took on the role of military leader, he also began a long series of affairs. He became known for his romances, especially with his mistress, Gabrielle d'Estrie. Margaret, too, began having relationships of her own and became involved in political plots and scandals that embarrassed the crown. The situation got worse. In 1583, Margaret was accused of taking part in rebellious activities, and her behaviour at court became a problem for her family. She was sent away from Paris and eventually exiled to the countryside, living in isolation in the fortress of Usson. There she remained for many years, far from politics and far from her husband. Meanwhile, Henry's path took a dramatic turn. After years of war and several twists of fate, he became King of France in 1589. But even as king, his marriage was a problem. Margaret, now separated from him for years, was still officially queen. Yet the marriage was broken in every way, personally, politically, and religiously. It wasn't until 1600, 27 years after their wedding, that their marriage was officially annulled. By then, Henry had converted again to Catholicism for political reasons and was preparing to marry Marie de Medici, who would give him an heir. So what began as a royal union meant to unite France ended in separation, betrayal, and exile. From the moment the bells of Notre-Dame rang on that wedding day, it was clear this was no ordinary marriage. Looking back, do you think it ever had a chance to succeed? When a wedding is planned as a trap, built on fear and false promises, can it ever bring peace? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that change the world.